two kingdoms. A kingdom of light and a kingdom of darkness. Up here on our table we have some lilacs that are, we would say, finished. And we have some lilacs that are in the full of their beauty with the aroma and the beautiful look that they have. The amazing realization is that as Paul writes to the Galatian Christians about these two kingdoms, Paul's words continue to be true for us today. The same two kingdoms that Paul is writing to the Galatian church about some thousands of years ago is still true for us today. I didn't live in that time, but as I look at our time today, it seems all the more stark about God's kingdom and a worldly kingdom. And both of those are described in these verses. Last week, Sharon and I enjoyed traveling to Toledo, Ohio, to participate in our granddaughter Emma's dedication. Pastor Joel Shank of Toledo Mennonite Church led in that dedication service. He asked the parents, the grandparents, and the whole congregation to will you commit to raise Emma in the way of Jesus? That, in my mind, was a clear choice of choosing God's kingdom and not this other sinful kingdom. And that's a commitment that those of us there and those of us here have made with our children and really with each other. That's what Christian nurture and spiritual growth is about, is to nurture each other, to encourage each other to walk in God's kingdom. I had fun last week because I only had 2 words to say in the whole service. We will. And last week we were saying we will choose love and joy over hatred, discord, and jealousy. Then on Monday morning when we were back, we got the DVD from last Sunday's service, and we were listening to Cam and Ayami share about their ministry in Japan. And again, I observed the choice of 2 kingdoms, the light of God against the darkness of Satan. 2% of the Japanese people follow Jesus in some way. And for me, that means that our intercession in prayer for Cam and Ayami's ministry is vital. It's imperative. It is required on our part to cover them with prayer as they minister in Japan. When they interact with their coworkers, their neighbors, their friends, they are being the light of Christ. They are inviting people to choose a kingdom of Jesus, the kingdom of light, and walk away from the kingdom of darkness. 2 kingdoms. Which one will you choose? Paul minces no words as he talks about these 2 natures. And it's good and right that we've memorized love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. But how many of you have memorized the words of the sinful nature? Our desire is to stay away from that. And Sharon wondered when I put this first text together, she said, "What are you going to preach on?" I said, "Well, I don't really know, but we'll see where the Spirit takes me." Paul doesn't mince any words here. The sinful nature wants to do evil, which is just the opposite of what the Spirit wants. And the Spirit gives us desires that are the opposite of what the sinful nature wants. These 2 forces are constantly battling against each other. That's the part I don't like. I don't like to do stuff that I have to do over and over again. I like to do it once, be done. But Paul is telling us that these 2 kingdoms are battling inside of us. As Brad had us think about, these 2 computer drives are there, and we have to keep choosing which one. Satan continues to work for the hearts and minds of people. Even though we have the power of Jesus' resurrection, we have to claim that in our daily living. Yes, Satan has been defeated. Make no doubt about that. Satan is defeated. The scoreboard reads God 98, Satan 15. But Satan is still doing after-game interviews. Satan has been defeated, but he's still roving around trying to talk to you and get you on his team. Remember Jesus? Just before he began his earthly ministry, he was out in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights fasting. And Satan came to him to tempt him. It's an enticing temptation. Satan won't accept Christ's victory and will constantly invite us to consider how to satisfy the itches of that other part of us. I found this little writing in one of the commentaries, quite old, but this is what it says. I'm a man, and a man's a mixture. Right down from the very birth, for part of him comes from heaven, and part of him comes from earth. God took the soil and formed the man, and then he breathed into man and woman. So we are that mixture of holiness and, I don't know if carnality is the right word, humanness, human nature. Paul talks about love. Joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, and self-control. But what about this list? What do you want to do with this list? Sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness, wild parties, and other sins like these. That's quite a list. And they are strong and dark actions. I think it would be easy for many of us to say, I don't do those things. We don't have that in our community. And I think that's exactly what Satan wants us to think and respond to this list. The realization for me is that these may be the full-blown sins that Paul points out. But Satan isn't always interested in those. He's interested in inviting us to take little steps in the direction of that sinful nature. I thought of it like this. I talked about Jesus being tempted in the desert. At one point, Satan invites Jesus to turn those stones into bread. Well, I think what Satan really likes to do is to get you to think, well, I won't turn a stone into bread, but this little pebble over here, how about if I make that into a fish cracker? That's okay. But what we've done by accepting that little stone and heeding Satan's desire is that we have taken a step in the direction of Satan and away from the cross. So when we read this long list of nasty-looking stuff and we say, no, not me, we forget about all the little bitty steps that we take each day that take us either toward Satan or toward Christ. What will we choose? Satan's kingdom or God's kingdom? The first item that Paul mentions is sexual immorality. And I could spend the next hour giving you definitions for all of these things and what the Greek word is behind them, like the word carousing is there. Well, that's a word that in Greek meant that when somebody won a race, like in the Olympics, all of their buddies would get together with them and they would celebrate and run around. That was called carousing. And that's a little bit of what carousing is today, that you get together with your friends and you run around and you do stuff, and usually you end up going in the direction of trouble instead of good. But this morning, I want to spend a little more time talking about the first thing that Paul mentions to the Galatian church, sexual immorality. Now, I don't know if he put that there because that was the main reason or if that was the first thing that came to his mind. But the first thing I want you to think about is that for the Christian in that day and age to be called to sexual purity was a really high calling. The Greeks and the Romans were were aware of using sexuality to worship their pagan gods. The concept of only having sexual relations with a marriage partner was a new idea. So when Paul comes and talks to the Galatians church, he's really knocking the foundation out from underneath them. What? Only have sex with my wife? Well, if I go up to the temple of Artemis, the goddess of love, there are prostitutes there, and the way we worship them is to have sex with them. And Paul is saying, no. Christ calls us to something different. The idea in this day and age that Paul was writing was that the gods in heaven who controlled everything that happened on earth may give their blessing or withhold their blessing depending on how they felt. And the way that you encouraged them to be plentiful was to remind them that sexual activity was good. That's where the fruit came from. Not only human fruit, children, but also livestock and crops. So when Paul writes about sexual purity and sexual immorality, he is really asking these early Christians to make a substantial change in their life and in their world. I don't think it's a whole lot different for us today. Jesus talks about sexual immorality. The Ten Commandments in the Old Testament he referred to in Matthew, do not commit adultery. But then Jesus added to that, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman, or I'll add, or a man, lustfully, has already committed adultery with them in their heart. The Christian call for sexual purity rocked the world then, and it rocks our world now. Sexual immorality is the other side of sexual purity. Sexual immorality says, I will use you at my convenience, and when I'm done, I'll walk away. The marriage covenant says that we will be together in mutuality. We will love and respect each other mutually. And in the context of that, we find God's Spirit and God's love, joy, and peace. The options for sexual immorality are expansive in our society. Paul's call for sexual purity is just as relevant today as it was for the Galatians. Hire a prostitute? How about look at an R-rated or X-rated movie? What are you watching on your TV? How about an adult bookstore or a graphically written novel? And the list can go on. Our phones and our flat-screen TVs allow us to view the intricate beauty of nature and all kinds of sports games. But those devices also allow us to see into the darkest places of sexuality. Which kingdom will you walk in? Which kingdom will we walk in as God's people? Paul raises his voice to us. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have nailed the passions and desires of their sinful nature to his cross and have crucified them there. Christ will take these sinful natures and desires, but we need to let them go. We let go by walking away from Satan and towards Jesus, even in the smallest decisions and steps. I'm pausing here because a number of years ago, I went to a seminar about sexual addiction. And I was shocked to see the images that this presenter had of people's brains. It showed the picture of people's brains who were addicted to heroin and cocaine. And their brains, as a top view down, were all black and gnarled. But what shocked me was that was the same picture of a brain of someone who was addicted to pornography. An addiction. That means that your body and the chemicals in your body need you to see that. That is our society's form of sexual addiction, of sexual immorality. How do we walk in this world with these kinds of temptations and choices that we have all the time? My first suggestion is that we keep to our commitments. Paul is inviting the Galatian church to follow Jesus. We have made a choice to follow Jesus. So in all of our decisions and all the things we do, we need to choose to follow Jesus. That's walking toward Jesus' light and walking away from Satan's darkness. That applies to everyone. If you have made the covenant to be in a marriage relationship, then that means that all of your sexual desires and focus is with that one other person and no one else. Keeping to our commitments, keeping to the covenants that we have entered, allows us to follow Jesus, allows us to live a life that is full of love and joy and peace, and not of sexual immorality and impurity and lust. Another thing that I'm aware of is that Jesus' kingdom is light, and in the light we see things. Satan is about darkness and the inability to see things. If the book that you're looking at or what's on your screen on your phone embarrasses you and you don't want the person sitting next to you to see it, why are you looking at it? Satan loves secrecy. So use that as a guide for what you're doing and looking at. If you're willing to do it out in the living room or with your wife or husband looking at it, then that's good. But if you're clustering yourself away in the bedroom to watch something on a movie screen or your TV set, ask yourself, am I following Jesus or am I not? When we notice an attractive woman or man, we need to remind ourselves that they are created in the image of God. He is more than muscles and a deep chest. She is more than hips and breasts. They are a person created in the image of God. They are a wife and a husband, a son, a daughter, a parent, a professional. They are persons with emotions and dreams. And that is part of the guile of pornography, is that we only see a sexualized individual. And we don't see the rest of their lives. One of the hard parts for me in preparing a sermon like this is I will not type into my computer any word like sex or pornography or anything like that. Because the way the computers work is as soon as you put a word in like that, other things pop up. So the statistics I have are from some other books that we have that we use in premarital counseling. And there's also been, I've been getting an email from Christianity Today about a series about pornography and freeing people of pornography. You know what the numbers are about sexual immorality? 60% of men, and so I'm saying all that these numbers might be a little bit give or take. 60% of men and 30% of women use pornography. Financially, in the United States, we spend more money on pornography than we do on all of the professional sports combined. Paul's letter was not only to the Galatians. Paul's letter is to us today in the world we live in. We need to constantly choose God's kingdom. Imagine, you really need to imagine, a warm summer day. A day where you'd like to be outside with the grill. Well, King David was on one of those warm days. On the second story of his home. He really should have been away with his troops at battle, but he hadn't gone. And the reality was he was bored. And as he walked around the rooftop on that warm evening, out over the way in the neighbor's house, he thought maybe he saw something there. He should have walked away. He should have let fuzzy be good enough. But no, he went back to his closet and got a binocular. And he took the next step away from God and toward Satan. And he looked to see, and he said, aha. And lust set in. What a beautiful woman. And he wasn't thinking about Bathsheba's husband, or her dreams in life, or what she liked for the evening meal, or what colors were her favorite colors to decorate with. He was only looking at her as a sexual object. And each step that King David took, a man after God's own heart, took him further and further away from God and further into the darkness of Satan. He called her to her home. He had sexual relations with her. And then he decided he wanted to marry her, but the only way he could do that was to get rid of her husband. So he conspired to have her husband, Uriah, murdered. You see, each little step makes a difference. Each little step does matter. Because as soon as Satan gets you stepping in one direction, it will be easier to step the next time. It was only for David when the prophet Nathan came to him and held up a mirror in front of him. And sin is that way that a lot of times we can't see it ourselves. It's those around us that see it first. David confessed his sin. He repented of his sin. And many of the Psalms are filled with his words of repentance and remorse and pain. Paul is reminding us that we live in a dark world. Satan's kingdom is everywhere. So is God's. So is God's. Just like our granddaughter's baby dedication, we need to choose God's kingdom and the signs of God's kingdom. Say with me the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Which kingdom will you choose? Amen.